happened in my time. But on that note, it is 5:30. We have the live stream started and we do have quorum here. So I'll just check first though with everybody who's here tonight. Does anybody have a time limit when they would need to leave the meeting? Because if we have anybody leave at this point, we would be losing quorum. Okay, I'm seeing all nodding or shaking heads, so we're good to go then. Again, hopefully we're not going to be here too late tonight. But with that, Laura, I will turn it over to you then.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Okay, so let's get this started. We'll bring the meeting to order. I'd like someone to approval of the agenda. I need someone to Indira, and we all need to vote on approval of the agenda. Okay, thanks. Confirmation of meetings. I need someone to confirm the meetings. Jordan? And John? Okay, and then we need to vote on that. Perfect. Okay, so the meetings, okay. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Nope, okay. Are there any delegations tonight?
No delegations, no briefings, Laura, so we can jump right into the business.
Okay, let's get to the business. Presentation of Mayor Council member interview responses. And that was distributed in the agenda. And I have to say, Lindsay, you did a terrific job. Really good job. Thank you. Okay, so we would like to start the discussion on this. What did the committee think of the interview responses that we conducted?
I thought there was a bit of a mixed bag as far as the request for administrative support. Some seemed to think it was, absolutely necessary. Others didn't seem to think as much. And then there was some other ones, and I don't know the history behind this, but others that said that they would do it, but only if it wasn't shared. Is there an issue with sharing administrative support? And there was a couple of comments of lack of trust as well, which I found a little concerning.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. So yeah.
No, it was quite astounding. In my, some of the veteran counselors I found are determined to work a certain number of hours a week and no more, and they don't engage in social media. They don't do anything, so they're not asking for administrative support as necessary. I think that a lot of the other counselors, the newer counselors, have taken on so much, and they have a huge social media presence. They respond to everything all within a short period of time. They work, essentially their attention is 24/7 on council, regardless if they have a full-time job. It is quite staggering, actually, in my opinion, to see or to hear about their days and how they manage to fit it all in. I found that the administrative support question with a couple of the counselors, that it's like very competitive. And I didn't know that it was this, it's not a congenial, like, we're going to put a motion forward and nobody else can see this research and I'm going to, it's like this breakthrough, and there's not a lot of collaboration on this council that I understood from the counselors that we spoke to, which is very sad. Or some take it to the next level where they want their own research done the way that they, and be able to interpret it without other counselors seeing that. It's a bizarre concept to me, but it is not a collaborative approach by a couple of the counselors, not all of them, but the ones that wanted support, but they want a portfolio of money so they can pay their own person. But yeah, there's conflicts of interest all over the place on that one. So there didn't seem to be a consistent message. But from what I got, the majority of people would really benefit. So they said to administrative support for research. And to explore what other municipalities are doing on certain topics. That was the ongoing theme, in my opinion. Laura and Jordan, you might disagree with me, but that's sort of what I got out of it.
Jordan, did you have your hand up first?
No, Indira, I think.
Okay, go ahead, Indira.
So certainly the same observation as John, that there was a lack of consensus. And what I wondered, and it's kind of to Lindsay's point, was the lack of a definition of administrative support may have created quite a variation in terms of what people might have imagined that type of support encompassing. And certainly I don't think that, so I feel as though the input wasn't necessarily determinative because there wasn't consensus. And because we haven't defined what administrative support may be, so what it left me with was that perhaps, and I didn't have a chance to pull it up to remind myself what the wording of our terms of reference are, but perhaps it's a case where we're making a recommendation to council that that more research needs to be done in terms of what level of support would be useful, as opposed to a direct yes, definitely this should be supported. So,
Okay, Jordan, did you want to add to something? I thought I saw your hand up.
No, I mean, I would echo what everybody else has said and just add that my sense is there wasn't a clear direction from the surveys or the interviews that any administrative level of support would be useful. But that said, I think that there's enough evidence and enough counselors who did report that it would be useful that it's probably a worthwhile recommendation to make. It's probably not a super expensive thing to ask for or for the city to provide. If it was, an additional staff person or 2 part-time staff people or something along those lines. So I think that I would be in favor of a recommendation that increased administrative support be made available to counselors in an amount roughly equivalent to 1, full-time person or in that range. But perhaps better done by distributing it amongst 2 or 3 people in a partial load way. Like, I think that would be better in many ways, because that way, if that person goes on leave for whatever reason, or if if there were 2 or 3, then a couple of counselors could share that partial person rather than all of them sharing a single person, because there was some considerable skepticism by at least some counselors as to whether that would be workable to have one person who kind of got to see under the curtain of what everybody else was working on. So I think that that's how I would frame it, as maybe 2, 3, even up to 4 people each working in a fractional way, such that it added up to one sort of full position for support.
Lindsay?
No, I would agree with Jordan, and I think a big part of this too is for those counselors who work full-time elsewhere and are very limited to before work, their lunch hour, and after work to council business, that their biggest issue seems to be being able to work with city staff who work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, right? So that is, it's like they need that liaison to find out, like when they reach out looking for support, they're only able to do it on their hours outside of their full-time employment. So that seems to be an issue as well. That stood out in my mind.
Okay, anyone else? No? What I was thinking is maybe we could offer it in a recommendation as a pilot project, that it could be shaped as they grow into it, or it evolves in a way that when I went through the interviews, I found there is a need that the counselors do need someone. Maybe we start with one person and with someone else as a backup if that person is away for some reason, sick or on vacation, that there would be a backup person to help them, but that this person would be able to follow contact sheets or complaints through the contact us line, so that could be traced as well. That would be one duty that I think would be important to the counselors and be very helpful, because that's what was one of the complaints that we found when they were talking to us, that they would put things in and they wouldn't be able to trace them, or that was something that slowed them down. Also, maybe some research that they could do, or as when the counselors are working and they couldn't access other members of staff, that person could be their contact person to access the staff member when they were at work to follow up on various issues or complaints or whatever they needed done for them, and they would act on their behalf. Now, in terms of writing motions, I found the clerks helped a lot with that. They could help you, or if there was a planner or someone else, they could help you with the motion. So that person could help them, but the admin person could help direct them to who could help them write the motion too. Is that correct, Derek? Am I in the right? That's what I found. If I needed to write a motion, I would rely.
I'm going to let Janet comment on that as she has her hand up.
Janet. Oh, I can't. Where? Okay, I don't see that. Hi, Janet. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I had my virtual hand up, so maybe I was hiding somewhere. Yeah, staff can always assist with writing motions when it comes to providing some guidance in terms of procedural correctness, or if there's a particular piece of legislation that needs to be cited, that kind of thing. We can't really get involved in sort of the political aspect of it. We have to keep our sort of political administrative hats separate. But staff are always willing to help. If a counselor wants to submit a motion that they're thinking about, they can submit it in advance. Staff can take a look at it, make some suggestions, and that kind of thing. I think, Laura, if you'd maybe grant me a little bit of leeway here, and you can tell me to be quiet at any time if I'm overstepping here. I did read Lindsay's notes, and I agree with what you guys have all been saying, that it seems to be quite sort of varied in terms of the responses. And one of the things that we've sort of chatted about, excuse me, a little bit internally, is the idea of just how difficult it is sometimes to put into words where it is you need the help, right? You know you're busy, you know you're frustrated, but to actually sit down and say, I need help with this, or I need help with that, or to come up with the specific examples of where you need help, it's hard to sort of put pen to paper and come up with those. So we've sort of been talking about the idea of what we sort of been calling like a council concierge type of role, maybe as a pilot, like you suggested, maybe a couple of part-time individuals, so that there is that idea of coverage kind of thing. But what it helps with is it's a single point of contact for all questions from counselors. So if they have questions because they've got a motion and they need help, you could contact this person. And then that concierge would serve to, put them in touch with, okay, if this is a motion with respect to something if it's a land use planning matter, maybe they need to speak to somebody in planning. If they have questions about what's the procedure for this, then they need to speak to somebody in clerks. If it's, it was a snow day and my garbage didn't get picked up, that person can put the counselor or their constituent in contact with the right person. But it provides the counselor with that single point of contact. And when I say single, it might be more than one individual, but they don't have to start trying to figure out, oh, do I need to talk to somebody in solid waste? Do I need to talk to somebody in clerks? Do I need to talk to somebody in planning? And that those roles would kind of triage the requests that counselors have, whether they're requests that are coming from themselves, if there's research that's needed, or if they are requests that are being forwarded because of constituents that have reached out to the counselor. So I just share that as sort of food for thought as you try and sort of make your way through this idea of administrative assistance, because it can mean one thing to somebody and something quite different to somebody else. But the advantage that I kind of saw to this concierge position is that it would allow us to really kind of get some metrics around where the requests for help are coming from, right? Exactly how many requests are we getting for research, and how many requests are we getting for help with motions? How many requests are we getting because somebody's, garbage or recycling didn't get picked up, or, you know what I mean? And then that would help us in the future better define what that role of administrative support is if we are looking to make this a permanent full-time position, one person, two people, kind of thing. So I think I've spoken long enough, and I'll leave it at there, just as food for thought for you. Thank you for indulging me.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I would certainly, I would support a pooled resource for administrative support. I don't think counselors need a one-to-one administrative assistant. The idea of a pooled resource has a lot of benefits where you could have, 3 or 4 people that could probably specialize in specific areas. It'd be really hard to find one administrative assistant who is a social media expert, who, it was a research expert, and who could also, manage calendars and book appointments. Whereas if you had a pooled resource of people, you could have somebody who has some social media expertise. You could have somebody who has, expertise in an area of research around land development use or whatever. So that's the real benefit of a pooled use. And then to further on Janet's point as well, that you can then track the usage and the requests, and maybe next go around they should have 2 or 3 people that have social media expertise and only 1 person that has research expertise.
I like it. Go ahead, Lindsay.
And that just ties in. I think, Janet, that's a wonderful idea, and I think it ties into what we were hearing, especially for new counselors. The training that they receive when they first take over the position, and then they feel like they're thrown to the wolves. Like they get a lot of good information, but then when it comes to actually putting that to use and what they have to do and who they have to reach out to, they feel very lost. So I think if they know that there's that go-to person when they have any questions whatsoever, I think that would, especially in the first couple of years of a new term, would make just a massive difference.
I would agree as well. I would agree on that. So we're all in agreement then that we think maybe, I like the idea of calling it a concierge. I like that, because that person could be in the center directing the traffic until they figure out, and call it a pilot project, possibly concierge, until they sort out what would be the best solution. So we could put that in the recommendations. All agree? Yeah.
I will note specifically the use of the word concierge, but
Okay.
I think I have some really good notes here that will help inform whoever we task with writing the final report. I kind of was taking rough ideas from what everybody was mentioning, so I'll note right now that the committee has, I'll say, tentatively approved the use of administrative resources in sort of like a shared pool format, and then using those notes, we can work with the report writer to draft something for a first draft of the report, if that's okay with the chair and the committee as a process on this moving forward.
It's fine with me.
Excellent. That went very quickly. You're a very good group. So Laura, sorry, I've taken enough time. I will turn it back over to you, Laura.
No problem. Yes, I think we have a great group here. A lot of different skill sets. Okay, so that's the administrative support. Any other input with the, go ahead, Indira.
Yeah, I just wanted to surface that it was very disheartening to see some of the negative experience that our counselors are having, and it seemed to me that there's one particular counselor, it seemed, that's particularly struggling. And one of the observations I had in relation to opportunity, and this is not an easy endeavor, but is there some way that that the expectations of the general public and residents can be better managed? Because the notion, there were many comments around, our constituents expect us to be available 24/7. They expect immediate response. They're not using perhaps some of the resources and tools available to them, and then of course some of the behavioral issues. So I just raise that as we've ventured out into a number of different topics with the interview, not necessarily specifically related to administrative support or remuneration, but I thought it was worth just discussing. Are there any observations that we would want to surface as a result of some of that feedback? And I think relatedly, the mental health impacts that were communicated. So.
I agree that it was very distressing. We learned a lot, and it was very sad. I felt very, very sad after talking to some of them. Yeah, how we could use that going forward and offering, but I think, are we going out of our scope, Janet and Derek? Are we breaching scope by going down that?
To give some context here, I think it's, if you view it in the lens of the two areas of focus, which are administrative assistance and remuneration, I think if you view it in that, but I myself am uncertain as to how either of those would be able to help with those mental health aspects and the public. But I'll quickly note and then turn it back over to John, is that Indira had asked a question at the last meeting about if council members had access to the EAP program, which I believe is Employment Assistance Program, and it is my understanding that they do have access to that program, which is offered to city staff. So with that, I believe Mr. Bolognoni would like to add something.
Good evening, everybody. One of the things I've learned from this group here is to avoid the scope creep that happens in these type of exercises. I'm really interested in how we go forward with the report. Some of the information we talked about is good for context, and it's important, I think, for the committee to bring that forward. But as Derek had mentioned before, we're really focusing on the remuneration as well as the support, whether it's a concierge group or a person or an individual. As Janice said, sometimes council will ask for certain things, but they don't really know exactly what it is that they want, which puts us in a position to try to define sometimes things that aren't definable. So I think this group is going down the right path with respect to this. I just want to make sure that we're consistent with the mandate that we've been asked to do, and I think we are. And you know, as I said, I've learned the word scope creep. It's an interesting phrase, so we should try to avoid that and be consistent with what the requests are. And as I said, I think this group is diverse and doing a great job, and just a matter of putting that down in writing, presenting it, and having council buy it. And I think it's going to be very easy for this group to sell our report to council. So thanks. And my internet's unstable. I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to zoom myself back out again. So I apologize. But let's keep going. Thanks.
Okay, Derek, you're up next. I see your hand.
Just to quickly add to John's point, the structure of the final report, if we go off the basis of the last report, will have an observation section where perhaps it would be worth noting that that was something that was found in the surveys, was this difficulty in terms of dealing with the public and perhaps the effect on mental health. So that would be worth noting, even if it doesn't color the final recommendation.
Indira?
I would just add, because I did open up the terms of reference, and the wording is examine the current demands and workload, et cetera, and then identify options and make recommendations. So I think I like the recommendation that we are reflecting that in the contextual piece, because I think, you know, we think about workload in terms of how many hours, but the workload is also the mental demand, right? So I think that's helpful context.
I think John was next. John, and then Lindsay.
Yeah, and I think just to bring it back to you know, the mental health aspect of things, I think is, if we want to keep it within our scope, we could include somewhere in our final report about the extended health benefits that are available to counselors. And I know Derek's mentioned that the EAP program is a part of it, but making sure that that's a part of it, and what any other type of counseling support that that would be available to counselors as well.
Thank you, John. Lindsay?
Sorry, my mute button wasn't going off. I think because we are helping determine or recommending a pay for counselors the next term, the new council, I'm looking at what they've gone through, especially the climate, online, social, and the parameters being pretty much undefined. I almost call it a danger pay, because right. So it can be tied into the remuneration based on the fact that while it may be 30 hours a week, is it really? I think it's should be a mandate of the council and the city to be very clear with any members of the public who would like to run for council exactly what is involved. And I think in order to, we have a lot of councillors, there's word that a lot of the current councillors are not running again for this specific reason. So I think that the public really needs to be made aware of that. And I also think that as far as the, it's like an incentive, and with more money, you can deal with it a little bit more. And I think it can be incorporated in there. That's just my opinion. I find that it's going to be very difficult in this climate, and especially from the words of some of the councillors, to encourage women to run for council. And maybe a little bit more money might be an incentive, but I think it would be negligent of the current council in the city not to be very clear about the expectations and what they're in for. Because anybody that's on social, anybody that was receiving emails that we heard from, immediate action, people showing up at their house. I mean, just crazy stuff, right? So there needs to be, I think, if not part of our mandate, a really big recommendation on increasing awareness about this role and what it involves. And I'm going to get yelled at by John.
I see John's hand up. Go ahead, John.
No, I'm not going to yell at all. I agree with Lindsay 100%. Whether it's in an observation piece or a recommendation, we recognize from a staff level, specifically our department, that we need to do a better job to get a more diverse council in place. I mean, we need to take a look at this with an EDI lens. We need to take a look at this through all sorts of diversity issues, because we can only make better decisions when we have a very diverse council as opposed to one that's predominantly dominated by white males. So I agree with Lindsay, and like I said, whether it's an observation piece, a recommendation, I know as part of the election campaign, Dan and I are going to be doing a lot more work to try to bring this to the community's attention and try to provide some tools and opportunities for more women and a more diverse population to run in future elections, similar to volunteering on various committees as well. We've taken the approach that it's necessary, and it's not something that's just desirable. We think it's necessary. So anything that we can do to bring that out into the community, as part of our report, I think that's a great idea. I think it's something that we should really put a good bang on the buck, so to speak, for that, because I think that's important. And as you guys are representing the community, who else better than to provide that, present that to the rest of council and the community when we come back with a report in March, I think. So yeah, I think it's really Lindsay.
Okay, Jordan, you had your hand up, and then Janet. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Thanks. It's outside of our scope, but I'll just say that Kingston has a sort of district system rather than an at-large type of system, and the next council will be elected by district as well. And one of the reasons, in my understanding, that people like that approach is that it does tie the councillor to the district, and maybe to too much of an extent, it lets people know where on the block your councillor lives, and people are inappropriately showing up at their homes. But it does make it more likely that your councillor will be your neighbor, right? There's no guarantee of that, but that makes it more likely. And at least my experience in the last election was, if you're not a neighbor, they probably don't want you as their councillor. So it's and that's totally reasonable, especially in the system that we're using. So I say that just to address some of the issues that we have. And some of them, I think, are inherent in the local representation at that level of local neighborhood that we've adopted in Kingston, for better or for worse. But that's outside of the scope of what we were asked to review. But on the remuneration part, I would say that it's not just about the pay, it's about the benefits as well, right? Like to me, it's a remuneration encompasses the full pension and benefits in addition to compensation, direct compensation. And I haven't seen anything, and maybe Derek or Janet or somebody, John, can tell us about provisions, let's say for parental leaves for counselors. I don't think I've come across any such thing, but you know, there needs to be support. What about childcare allowances? You know, how is a single parent going to be a city councillor if they have to lug their kid around everywhere? It's, you know, there's things like that that, you know, if we want to be able to have a city council that is diverse and actually open for people from different backgrounds to participate in, we need a broader set of benefits available, things that include childcare subsidies. You know, daycares aren't open in the times when council runs, and you know, especially when council meetings are in person, but even when they're not, that the meetings overlap with bedtimes. Like somebody has to be there to feed the kids and put them to bed and do all that stuff, right? And you know, it's a big ask for counselors, even in a two-parent family. You know, maybe the other parent is working on their own stuff. Like there should be some provisions for that, I think, as part of the total compensation package. And I, you know, so we've talked a little bit about the EAP and the benefits and you know, supports, mental health supports, and some security supports that I think sometimes might be needed. But I think that, you know, we would be not doing our job if we didn't say that the city should be looking at a broader range of supports for families, so that the counselors who have families can actually participate more fully, and so that people who have families might consider running to become a counselor.
Okay, thank you for that, Jordan. So I think Janet was up next.
Sorry, guys, a little slow on hitting unmute button. Okay, so the first time I had my hand up, it was just to add some additional comments to what John had said in terms of nominations for 2022 and things that we're taking into consideration in terms of you know, increasing, you know, sharing information and seeing what we can do to communicate sort of what is expected of counselors. We will be looking at holding a couple of candidate information sessions. One of the benefits of Zoom is that can be live streamed and recorded. So if there are people who aren't able to attend one of the sessions, and we're looking at probably a day session and an evening session to account for the fact that people have different, not everybody works 9 to 5, or not everybody works straight nights, to try and make sure that everybody who wants to can attend, but we will be able to record it and share it on the website. One of the things that we are looking at doing as part of our information sharing during those sessions is to provide a bit more context in terms of the committee workload that comes with counselors, because that's maybe an area where we haven't shared as much information in the past as we could have. It's more than just coming to a council meeting twice a week. You know, there's expectations to sit on council meetings. We can share at a very high level sort of what the average commitment is from counselors across the 12 members this term in terms of their weekly commitment, because as you've said, you know, some of them have a much higher hourly commitment than others. So we can share that average. I mean, that's not something that we can speak to from experience, but we do have metrics in terms of, you know, how many planning committee meetings took place over the term, what the average length of those planning committee meetings were, kind of thing. So we have committed to providing more detail that way. And then in terms of Jordan's question, in terms of parental leave, there were changes made to the Municipal Act a couple of years ago in terms of parental leave. Previously, it provided that if a counselor was absent for 3 months, then their seat would be declared vacant. That's no longer the case. Counselors are now permitted to be absent for 20 consecutive weeks. If the absence is a result of pregnancy, adoption, what does it say? Consecutive weeks, or if the absence is a result of the member's pregnancy, the birth of the member's child, or the adoption of a child by the member. And that's in accordance with the Municipal Act. So where previously that kind of leave was not available under the Municipal Act, there have been changes made that way, and we have built that into our procedural bylaw as well. And we have a process in place where if a member of council wants to take that leave, and we have had councillors take advantage of that opportunity. There's a process in place where they submit their request in. They don't, they're still entitled to it. It's their choice whether they want to still continue to receive agendas and communications and that sort of thing to be able to stay current, or whether they want to take a complete step back. They're fully remunerated during the time that they are on leave. Their benefits, their owners' contributions and everything continue during that period. In terms of their benefit package, it does match that of the non-union staff. So I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks.
I saw John and Derek's hands up.
Mine was by mistake.
Okay. John, did you have something to add?
Well, I would like to add something, except for Jen, it said exactly what I was going to say. It's good to see we're of the same ilk. It was Councillor Kiley was the last councillor took advantage of that program just recently. Change the legislation help the situation sometimes. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. I was just thinking along these lines of, marketing campaign for new counselors and giving out information or trying to help counselors. And I know it's a little out of our scope, but what about, like, I think in Toronto, they have a 311 line where you contact the city to get information. And the first thing in the voice recording it says is they will not tolerate any kind of language. They will not tolerate, you will be, no verbal abuse is tolerated, blah, 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 blah. Do we have anything like that to protect counselors, or could we implement something like that so that when, a counselor receives a message from someone that we say, this is not tolerated and you will be held accountable? Go ahead, Derek.
We do have that information on the city's contact us page. It talks about inappropriate communication and that city staff will not respond to in certain situations such as that. So I'm not sure what's on any recordings, but we do have this information. So that is something that we can, as part of the observations or recommendations, staff looking into ways to further communicate that, especially when I think people may not think of counselors as members of city staff, but in a way they are. So I'll make a note of that, but we do have that information.
Okay, go ahead, Lindsay.
I think,
Thank you.
Derek, I thought what was really interesting is one of the counselors said that they have to follow a code of conduct, and that limits what they can say, their behavior. But none of their constituents have to follow that. So I think it's, along those, raising awareness about that particular issue. What will be tolerated, what will not, and does it go beyond somebody? Well, you're not going to get a phone call back of that attitude, right? Like is there going to be repercussions for something like that? Is there any for the members of the public?
Right, Derek.
I think that's a difficult thing in terms of repercussions because people are entitled to services from the government. I know in extreme cases that people have been banned from city facilities due to behaviors or actions, but there is always recourse through police action in the criminal code. But I would just say it would be very difficult, and I've not heard of any other municipalities having areas where they can punish people for things like that outside of those areas. That I'm not familiar with that and haven't seen that in any comparator municipalities.
Okay, go ahead, Indira.
Yeah, and certainly that's what I would expect. I think as an employer, and labor was my area of focus for many, many years. So you have a very different range of options when you have an employment relationship compared to when you're serving the public. So, but where I think there are opportunities is to equip the counselors with here's how you can be responding, and to give them permission to understand that it is not expected that you tolerate this type of behavior, and here are a few word tracks, here are a few phrases, here are some strategies. So it may be bringing in some experts who could do some in-service sessions for that, having some resources. But I think it's those kinds of things that had gone through my mind because of the limitation with regard to holding people's behaviors, holding people accountable for their behaviors when we're talking about the general public, that it was more around how can we support them in terms of resources. And then just while I have, I wasn't sure, Lindsay, in relation to the comment about danger pay, just from a compensation perspective, the philosophy around premiums would be that if there is an aspect that's inherent to the role, so if we think about police officers, EMS, fire, etc., that they encounter specific risks, and those are reflected in the core compensation. So typically any sort of additional pay would be because it is not uniform, notwithstanding that I think all of us would agree people shouldn't have to be subject to abusive bullying behavior. But I do think we understand that when you're dealing with the public, in that particularly in this type of role, that the public are a collection of individual people, and that those behaviors will surface. So from a pure compensation perspective, I wouldn't see that there would be an opportunity to be recommending some sort of premium associated to what's essentially, I think, the nature of the role.
Thank you, Indira. That was very helpful and very informative. Go ahead, Lindsay. I saw your hand up.
Oh no, and I agree. I know we can't incorporate that in, but at the same time, while any counselor will tell you they didn't run to make money, right? Like they're not in this for money, but in this climate, wow, like there has to be. It goes well beyond public service, right? And I think that's the critical piece on looking at remuneration. It's like, okay, I know they're not in this for the money, but what are they in this for if they're just going to, if they're just going to be attacked verbally and by email and on social media? It's a given, right? So
it was very sad. Yeah. Thanks, Lindsay. Okay. Any other comments or concerns or questions or?
I see Jordan has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yours blends in with the background. Sorry, Jordan.
Background back here.
Yeah.
One off mission sort of point, and then back to the core mission. But I think it's important that the city clerk and that we go on record here that from the interviews, at least to me, it was very clear that counselors felt that initial training session wasn't sufficient. And I think the example that Indira just gave of, training counselors on how to respond to hostile citizens is something that you can only put so much into one afternoon or one day and have people be expected to sort of absorb it all. But I think there was a real sense of desire by the counselors, especially those for whom this was their first term, that there be a second or a semi-regular sort of training session, so you have the first one and then maybe give it a month or two and have a second one that you do some of these other things, because there's a real demand for some training on a lot of different things, including, I think, especially handling difficult conversations, right? And there's people who could do that, facilitate those things, and maybe you're doing it on an ad hoc basis, but I think it needs to be done in those sort of formal initial trainings. But have a second day, maybe a month later or something like that. So, and I'm sure John looks like he wants to respond to that, but I want to also get us back onto the topic of remuneration. And so I would say, in my view, the counselors are not paid anywhere near enough to reflect the importance of the decisions that they're being asked to make, nor are they being compensated sufficiently for the amount of time and dedication in straight up hours, never mind the preparation and the mental labor that goes into it outside of those hours. Like, I'm sure there's counselors who are having, sleepless nights and waking up early and thinking about the city and the people of the Kingston all the time. And so the compensation doesn't reflect that. I also got the sense that no current counselor thinks that a radical increases in compensation will be something that the average citizen will support. So I think that we do need to have an increase in compensation, but not by a lot. And Derek's provided us with some new numbers that show, the annual increments in the compensation. And so I would like to throw out there a number somewhere around $45,000 a year as the starting salary for the council, and they'll still have their cost of living bumps every year. So that's what I would put out there as something that I think would be an incremental. I mean, we're in a period where inflation's sitting at around 4.5% right now. So, I think that I don't feel like my sense is there's not an appetite to go as high as $50,000, although I think there's quite sufficient reasons to do that. But I would say somewhere 45, 46 is probably where we're looking at as a starting salary, recognizing that it was 40 at the start of this last council. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. Should we go back to John, because you had your hand up, John, and then go from there?
Thank you. Jordan, thank you for those comments. I think it's important as we evolve here at the city, our orientation, it needs to be a little more comprehensive. And it's important that we don't overwhelm council right away. We've got 4 days of training that we do after the year, and you can only absorb so much information. So the idea of having it throughout the year or throughout the term, I think is really important. And the things that you identified, I think those are things that we do have to work better on to assist council and get them with the tools that they need so that they can do their job to represent the community. So we're listening to what the community is saying, Jordan, and I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, so let's get back to where Jordan was about the remuneration. And who would like to go next?
I would just like to make a quick prompt to remind that the committee is tasked with the mayor's remuneration as well.
Exactly.
So just keep that in mind going forward.
Of course. Thank you, Derek. But yes, you're right on that. Okay, so Indira, you're great with numbers. You want to go next?
Just for clarity, then, have we moved on to 7B? Is that we're
I think that's
yeah, okay.
sort of where we've moved on to, unless anyone has anything else they'd like to say about A. Any other comments about A? Presentation, interview response? No? Okay. All right. Then we are moving on. Okay. Termination preferred option for administrative. Okay. So yes, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, certainly I appreciated the updated workup, and I lean toward, I know that we were given a couple of options in terms of the methodology of review in terms of which ratio to look at. I lean toward the salary as a component of budget, and I think what we've got here is the total budget, so operating and capital, which from my perspective would make sense, because although capital is more susceptible to fluctuation, I think to Jordan's point, it's reflective of the critical nature of some of the decisions that the councillors are influencing and making. So that would be where that to me in my head, that makes sense as in terms of a comparator benchmark. And then I was looking at, do we look at mean or do we look at median? And had noted that Brantford does seem, they're all very much in range. I put it in a graph because I wanted just to get the visual of the proportion of deviation, and they are an outlier. And so I was curious about, and Derek may have some perspective on this, but I was curious about whether there were any additional qualitative or quantitative factors that we would be aware of. I did take a look at the survey data for Brantford, and I didn't see anything that was materially different that would explain the deviation for both roles. And then I took a look at, well, 114,000 for essentially a CEO type of position is not a lot of money. So it makes some sense to me that there's probably a minimum amount that needs to be considered for those type of roles. But with the counselor rate, it is still a bit higher. So just I know Derek and I had a short exchange of information. Just thought I would table that there in case anyone else had been having the same observation.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Sorry, Jerry, maybe you can, I look at those numbers and I look at average. Once we get into mean and median, I just sort of lose, perspective. So for me, looking at it, it looks like our counselors make more money on average than most of the other municipalities that we're comparing here. And the mayor makes like he's sort of right in between, right? That's what you're getting out of that. That's what I walked away with. But if I'm wrong, you just tell me, because you're making graphs, man. Like I want to see your graph, because I look at all these numbers and they all just sort of float in and
well,
anyway.
no, and that was exactly why I think the ratio was helpful, because it gives you a relative comparison. And so yeah, absolutely. I think it's okay. Are we comfortable? And the reason I brought up the question about Brantford as whether it's an outlier or not, it may inform whether we look at the average or the median, which are mathematically different outcomes. Or if we're comfortable and we are happy to assume that there are some factors that are not quantitative that we've captured and not known factors that we might be aware of, but we think everything we are aware of, and the measures that we identified were relevant, they're a bit higher proportionally in terms of the quantum that they're paying for these roles, but we may feel that that's acceptable, and that may assist us in looking at the average, which personally, that's where I landed. I can offer that in terms of that's the conclusion that I raised.
I can just
Okay.
jump in on that point. I like the idea of using one of the ratios. Maybe the average is fine to me, but I think that whatever we decide in the final report, I think it would be very helpful to also calculate the per capita amount. So right now it's like 37 cents per person for a city councilor and $1.07 or something for the mayor. And I think that putting in those terms is going to be really important in the final report, that, it's $1.50 for your mayor and councilor for the year. Like that's a pretty good bargain, yeah. I think, for representation in a democracy. So I think that we absolutely have to include that calculation in our final report.
One question that we had, and I'm thinking Derek may have the answer for us, but we discussed last time, was whether or not, because I think I think that the figures that we have here, oh, so they have been updated to reflect the current. And so the question that we had was whether or not we know if our benchmark data are the current compensation rates.
I'd be happy to elaborate on that. I just have to bring up my notes, but they are the current compensation rates. So it would be for 2020 for the comparator municipalities, with the exception of Guelph. The data is from 2019. That was the most recent available data. And for Sudbury, their data is from 2020, but I could not separate out additional remuneration that may have been received from members who serve on committees, because in Sudbury, if you serve or chair a committee, you do receive some additional remuneration. So that is noted in the document I put together, and I think it would be incumbent to, if we put any statistics, to note that in the final report as well. So there are some limitations, but I feel if we note them, that is sufficient.
I have a question for everyone too. Maybe this isn't the time to raise it, but what about compensation for those on planning? As you all could see, persons that sit on planning do a lot more work because they meet more often and the meetings are quite long. And Lindsay, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to say the same thing, Laura. That's what came to mind, because I know that there are other municipalities that look at planning, but when Derek sent out that information this past week or last week on the number of hours, but also adding the fact that planning meets twice a month at 2.5 hours with average meetings, that's 5 hours plus all the prep time, which is hundreds of pages of documents. And I think adding that, when we asked the councillors and mayor what they saw in the next 4 years, they all refer to the incredible growth in this city, which means that it's not like the planning department's responsibilities are going to taper. If anything, they're going to continue to grow. And I found one point when we talk about, well, why planning and not the other committees? One of the councillors, and I'll say it's Rob Hutchison because he's been a councillor for a long time, and the way he said it just made such sense to me, where there's so many over this last decade or so many policies have been created for all these other committees that it's just, here's the prep, here's the meeting, here we go, and that's the end of it, right? Where the planning committee is under so many regulations, and it's like a nonstop barrage of information and responsibility and restrictions and. So I don't think the other committees would qualify, in my mind, for the members to have more, more money. But I think planning, I completely agree that needs to be added into the remuneration factor.
Okay, does anyone else agree with that? So we could sort of hash that out now. Indira, you agree? John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I would support that. It does. It's incredibly how much more when you calculate, as Lindsay mentioned, the amount of time. I think it's almost a 5-to-1 ratio as far as the time for total time at a planning committee meeting compared to the other committees. So I could support that being an additional piece to the remuneration. So that includes, like a top up, just like I think the deputy mayor gets an additional little stipend or something like that. So I would support that as well.
Okay, Jordan, thank you. Jordan, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of that approach as well.
Okay, should we set a number tonight, Derek, or should we just leave it as is?
Well, it would be helpful if there was a number set on that, or at least a methodology that could be arrived at for that. Just thinking in times of that, we're looking to have the final report done in March. So as much as we can accomplish tonight would be good.
Okay, so since we have the deputy mayor, I think the deputy mayor is paid $250 extra for the month. Is that correct, Derek? And then, so that might be a starting point. Yes.
I was just going to, sorry, I should have raised my hand.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that we may want to consider it being a percentage of base, because then it actually increments with the cost of living adjustments that are made annually. And my perspective on the load is that it seems considerable. So I was thinking, oh, would 5% make sense? It seems like maybe probably 10% is probably more fair if we're wanting to recognize the significantly different load that is associated to that particular committee.
I like how you're thinking. So if we were to do the math then, what would that?
Well, 10% would be more than the deputy mayor. So that would be a good sort of, does that help us to think that it's a, 5% or an 6% premium?
Right. Now, the deputy mayor, there's certain times of the year that the deputy mayor has more work to do than others. Like I think the summer it's busier. So, but you're right, it's consistent that the planning meeting usually they're heavy load. It is a heavy load.
Jordan has his hand up. It's hard
Oh,
to see.
sorry, I can't. Sorry, Jordan, just wave or something.
Yeah. I like the idea of setting the committee compensation as a percentage of the base. But I wonder if maybe Derek, if you can tell us what would be the increase if we didn't do any, like we're talking about reestablishing the floor, but suppose council had, another years or two of term, what would their increase have been this year? Or what does the non-unionized staff anticipate for an increase this year? Let's ask it in that way.
I'm afraid I don't have that data, but it is based on the CPI increase for the year. It's a specific number, so it's usually pretty low and tied to that. If you bear with me a couple of moments, I can take a look and see if I can find that in a report for you. So, but it is generally a pretty small amount. You can see it was set at $40,000. I did some math backward quickly here, set at $40,000 in 2018, and it is now, I believe, up to 43,000. So
yeah, I just I think CPI is tied to inflationary measures, right? And so if we're in a, we were pretty stagnant previously at pretty low rates, but I foresee that growing substantially. So saying it another way, if we didn't keep up with inflation in real dollars, the take-home pay would be a decrease, right? It would be a lesser take-home pay than what they had before if you don't keep up with inflation. So I'm still sort of looking at something around 4% is where I sort of land, which would take us to this 45K. I mean, I believe in counting. I like the ratio to ground things, but I also think it should just be a round number. Like I like $45,000. I think that's just around 4% increase from what it currently is. $44,000 is like a 1.9% increase. So I think that's the range that we should be aiming for. Is this? I would prefer we just pick a round number and said it's 44K a year to start, or it's 45K a year to start, and then we can justify it with these different ratios. We can calculate the various ratios and demonstrate that it's reasonable and it's consistent with the, what our comparator municipalities are doing. But because I don't think it's going to be out of whack to take a number that it's not entirely arbitrary, but I think it's important to have a round number, like at least in that first year. Sorry, Indira, I'll hand it to you.
I'd like to, Indira, I'd like to hear your opinion on this.
So I think the way that I would think about it is, are we of the opinion that our rate has lost pace with what we see in the comparator group that we've identified as being relevant with the profiles that we believe are relevant? And so when I look at that data, if I, as I said, I prefer the looking at it as salary as a proportion of total budget, we are in line. So in my mind, there is no catch up that is warranted. If we've established this as the comparator group, that we are in line with that. So then the question to me is, what then then is what informs what an appropriate, in my world, we would call it a cost of living adjustment as we set the new pace. So that's where if in the administration during the 4-year term, it has been aligned to whatever is appointed for the non-union municipal staff, then I would say that's really what it is. I mean, certainly we could round it, we could do that calculation. I will say my own bias working in the broader public sector under the current restraint legislation, and we have had 1% increases. So Kingston is a very public sector community, and so I think that there is, when we think about the different constituents within the broader public sector, there's lots of people who have been getting a 1% increase in their compensation level. So I think that certainly what we're doing with the municipal staff compensation, cost of living adjustments would be something I would think we'd want to pay attention to inform.
Jordan, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to jump in on that because I agree with the principle of it to a point, but then I don't, because this 1% cap under Bill 124, just because Premier Ford and the government of Ontario has instituted it doesn't mean it's constitutional, and there are legal challenges to that constitutionality. I think it's very anti-union, that legislation, and we don't have to get into the politics of it. It's not the right forum, but I don't think we should embrace 1% as the guideline simply because the provincial government has violated collective bargaining rights and instituted a 1% cap. So
Jordan,
I like the COLA, I like the other.
I would clarify that my
political.
my raising it was around context, because certainly in a lot of the information that we saw in the interviews, the councillors are very attuned to what the constituents are going to find is acceptable, and we saw that there was some concern about how the public would tolerate increases to their wages. And so I do think that, I mean, we can agree or disagree with the current legislative environment that's governing wages, but I think that it forms what might be perceived as reasonable. So and honestly, I'm just saying 4% in my world has not happened probably in the 20 years that I've worked in healthcare. So that to me is like a seismic, and that's why from my perspective, the question then is, do we think that we have a catch-up problem, and that when we look at our comparator group, we're aligned to the comparator group? So I don't think that we do have a catch-up issue.
I agree completely with you, and I didn't, if it came across as I was putting words in your mouth, I didn't mean that. I'm on this committee as the voice of labor. I'm representing labor at this table, and so I thought it was important to say that piece. But I agree with you. I don't see that there's a big catch up here. So I think we just round to the nearest $1,000 mark, and Bob's your uncle. Yeah.
Okay, that was a good exchange. That was very interesting. I'm just going to play a nemesis here. Is the one thing that concerns me is, well, there's many things, but one counselor said they're making decisions on a $500,000 budget at sometimes, or less, and no, $500 million budget. Did I say that? Yeah, $500 million budget, and the guy who's out mowing the lawn is getting paid more than he is. You know, the guy who cuts the lawn, and that's interesting. You know, that is interesting. That was a really good analogy, I thought. And also, when you look at it too, the prices of housing, I just pulled that up. In Kingston has gone up significantly. Like the average house, according to Remax, is incredible. Like 700, like it's just out of control in Kingston, $700 and some dollars. And the rate is going up significantly. And who knows what's going to happen to interest rates? Who knows what's going to happen to, you know, the future of housing for people to be able to afford housing. So all of this is sort of coming and growing into a situation where how are these people going to afford to buy a house within their district to represent their district? So it's just a very, we can't just come in and say, oh, these people need $60,000 or $80,000, but somehow we have to entice these people to want to be a counselor and to want, there has to be some kind of increase, I think, somewhere, because of the cost of living is going up significantly. And maybe this is something we can list about the cost of living going up in various places, but it has to be something the public can understand as well. Like for us, as I agree with Indira as well as you, Jordan, we can't just come in and say, this is the amount, like it's $10,000. The public would freak. They would absolutely have a heart attack, especially with COVID, and there's people that are not doing well as well. But there is a lot of things against people in Kingston, and it is becoming a very expensive place to live. And with inflation and who knows what else is going to happen in the economy, it's a little frightening for people. On that note, I agree with a slight increase. I don't know what number, somewhere, maybe it's 1 or 2%, maybe it's 3%. But I like the idea of also giving committees a little bit of extra to percentage. I think a good idea is to go with a percentage. That way it's quantitative. You can look at it and say, this is why. Everything has to be explained and it has to have a good reason of why we've done it. And it has to be explained rationally and logically to the public. Okay, anyone else?
Lindsay has her hand up.
Oh, I couldn't see it there. Thank you. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Sorry, I'm unmuted. So I think that I would agree with just a nominal increase, because I don't think, as long as this position is part-time, we can't do what I think should be done in the city, but that's just my personal opinion outside of the scope, but part of a possible recommendation that we should make, because the majority of councillors said this is a full-time job, full-time hours, and if you're going to do the job the way it needs to be done, it needs to be full-time. So that aside, that a recommendation, I think for now, I think we have no choice but to do an incremental increase and a nominal increase. And while we're on that, and Derek reminded us about the mayor, we've been talking about the councillors, I look at, we're slightly above average with what the councillors would be paid. We're below average for what the mayors would make. So I think that needs to be reflected, and that the mayors should be on average with the other comparators, just as the councillors are. Just put it out there.
Okay. Thanks, Lindsay. John, do you have anything to say? Are you hiding back there?
No, I think Indira has her hand up first.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
No problem. So it was just to say, Laura, I think, your comments with regard to the cost of living is what went through my mind first off was that often would form part of your compensation philosophy. So we've taken the view that what we're doing is a benchmark analysis, and we're going to align to benchmark. And I think, Lindsay, I like the notion that it's a consistent message to say we've determined the appropriate comparator group. We've determined that the average, not the median, not the 25th percentile or the 75th percentile is what we're going to target. But that would mean that both the mayor and the councillor roles are at minimum at the average of our benchmark group. And then if in the case of the mayor, that means bringing them up to that level. And then on the question of what's the increase, I prefer if we have clarity on what is driving the city's cost of living increase for the non-union staff to align to that. But to your point, Laura, around things like the cost of living, I think the CPI is a really good proxy, because it's known. Hopefully it's reasonably understood by the general public that they could get their heads around, because otherwise it would seem very arbitrary. So, you know, picking a 2 or a 3 or a 4% out, well, how did we arrive at that? Whereas the CPI is something that we can say that's the marker.
I agree. Yeah, we need something we can give a marker to. Exactly. John? Anyone else? Okay, only I see yours. Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I too think that, well, first of all, I don't think we'd look at we're not trying to determine what the CPI is or COLA is right now. That's built into the city remuneration policy, right?
Mhm.
Correct?
I
Okay.
believe
Well,
so.
I think that I guess where it's relevant is we're saying this the is it a 4-year period has stopped. We are suggesting we're going to establish the beginning of the next 4 years.
Got
So how are we establishing that rate for the councillors? I think we were saying for the mayor, we're going to align it to the average, and then the normal municipal administration practice would apply.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. So if that's the case, then I would support leaving council where it is right now, because I think as we said, it's above the average and the median for if we look at it in any of those scenarios, including the divided by total budget. And then I would also support bringing the mayor up to the average in that case as well. And then I would also support the additional pay for sitting on the planning council or planning committee, excuse me, and included as a percentage of their base.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification, maybe for Derek. So this is an expired rate. It's a 2020 rate for the counselors. So if we are following John's nicely summarized what I think some of the outcomes are we saying that that 2020 rate is going to be subject to the normal administration cost of living increase, or do we need to establish the 2021 rate? So I think for the mayor, we've said the 2021 rate is going to be the average of our comparator group. And sorry, I've got the wrong years, don't I? I've gone back in time before the pandemic. So yeah, sorry. So are we saying that these are the 2021 rates and that the 2022 rate for the mayor is going to be the average of our comparator group? And then the question I would have is, if these are the 2021 rates for most of the comparators, would we apply an adjustment to that, anticipating that would be needed to keep pace? And then are we establishing a 2022 rate for the counselors? That seemed awfully arduous to get at. Hopefully you understood.
No, I think I did. And so the numbers, unfortunately, because of the timing of this committee, it's kind of awkward, is that these are all 2020 compensation numbers. So we're not, unfortunately, we can't deal with 2021 numbers because of the time we're in right now. So we're going to have that 1 year gap, which makes it a bit awkward. But I think if you look at what is here, and I think what'll also help is I believe the council voted down last year their CPI increase. So this would be very similar to what they are receiving for remuneration in 2021, at least in Kingston. I don't think they're getting that CPI increase. So I think you can almost treat these as de facto 2021 numbers for Kingston, at least. So I think the goal of the committee then is to set what the new base remuneration, if it changes, for 2022 to 2026. Now, I did a bit of research because we've thrown around CPI a lot. According to Statistics Canada, the October 2021 CPI rate is 4.7%. So as Jordan pointed out, it is rather large, and these are historically large since I believe the mid-1990s. So if you do that, if you apply the 4.7% to the current council rate, you get a pay increase of about $2,000. Which in effect would bring the rate up to approximately $45,000, which is what Jordan had recommended. So I know there's lots of good quotes about lies, damned lies, and statistics, but on a really back of the envelope calculation, it seems like applying that would get us to that rough $45,000, which Jordan had suggested. And that is, I suppose, irrespective of where it fits on the comparator municipalities, because it then becomes a question of the committee is factoring in where compensation goes with the current CPI. You probably do not want to run the risk of effectively lowering compensation just based on the conversation that's been had. I don't think there's any desire for an effective lowering. So hopefully I was able to provide some context to the information that you're looking for there, Indira. I'm by no means a compensation specialist, so hopefully that helped.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the 43,174 is the 2021 rate. So it's the Kingston 2021 rate. I had thought I heard you say earlier that it was Sudbury and Guelph were 2020 rates. So my assumption was that the rest of the rates were 2021.
So to clarify, all of the rates are actually 2020 rates.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And Guelph is 2019.
Okay. Okay.
It just was based on the time of when we were asking for compensation levels. It was in late 2021. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Lindsay.
I think also as part of this report, I think it'd be very important for us to, we are not asking councillors and the mayor to give themselves a raise. This is I think that has to be made very clear, considering the number of current councillors who have already said they're not running. This is for a brand new council and a brand new mayor. So I think we have to reiterate that when we make this recommendation, just add that in. It's not the councillors giving themselves a raise. It is a committee recommending that the next council make this much money, right?
Thanks, Lindsay. I agree. And I think it has to be stated why we have decided this, and we have all the reasons why. And for reasons, extra work, more things are coming down the pipes in terms of building, and all the counselors said there would be more work in our meetings.
And can I just ask Derek if you could just confirm you weren't sure what the cost of living increase, how that determination is made for staff, for employees, for non-union employees?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of that as a unionized employee myself.
Oh,
so
okay.
I could be able to ascertain that information rather quickly, though, and share that with the committee. But yes, I don't have that information off the top of my head.
It just I don't think it's necessary for our decision. I just think it helps to think about the story that we're telling in terms of compensation administration for this group. So.
Sorry, and just applying that same logic, Derek, with the numbers for council, what would this bring us to for the mayor? Are we talking like 121, 122?
So to that point, Lindsay, I will calculate that quickly. I had done it back of the envelope. If we take the current rate and multiply it by the 4.6 CPI, it adds almost $5,800 roughly, which if you take that to the base, brings you to around $131,000. If you're just applying the CPI increase from October of 2021 to the 2020 remuneration rate, and you will see that on some of the comparators, such as the preferred option that Indira uses of the comparison to budget, when you apply the average ratio to Kingston's budget size, that gets you $129,000. So it is roughly in line with that. So there are some justifications that can be backed up for the, I'll use it lack of a better term, the system we have developed over these last 15 minutes of discussing the compensation.
And what I can stuff up now, Derek, we're just making stuff up, throwing numbers out there.
No, that's it's part of it.
No, I am.
It's an iterative process, and what we can always do is follow up later tonight with some more confirmed calculations.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think we have to remember the cost per person too. That's important in relaying the story.
Mm-hmm.
Indira, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just was thinking to Derek's point about the, what we've just codified, just for clarity, so we're taught, because of the lag time in terms of the data capture, we're saying our counselor rate is aligned, but we've now had a lapse in time. We need to bring it current to a 2022 rate, if that's the right time frame. So I think if we are consistent, we would be saying we need to adjust the mayor rate because it's not aligned to the average, which we said is the correct benchmark to adjust it to. And we would then also look at adding something similar to the CPI. So I don't know if others had thought about that, and just seeking agreement if we are all in agreement.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think of it in my tiny little brain as we're looking at baseline numbers here in these charts. And I'm assuming CPI is getting applied to all of them and will continue to get applied to all of them. I know council voted it down last year, but so I think about baseline. So I'm looking at baseline for councillors. We're already above what the comparator data is. So I'm saying my suggestion would be doing nothing with council's pay. I would suggest adjusting the mayor's pay to bring it up to the average. And I think it works out to be about a 3% or almost a $4,000 increase. To get him to the baseline, and then that position would continue on with the CPI as well. And the addition of the pay for the planning committee.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm not in agreement with that. I think that the counselor should be increased by some amount.
And I think, John, the disconnect from my perspective is we're saying we need to right size. So that's step one, but that is and so no adjustment for the counselors to right size based on the average. We need to apply an adjustment to the mayor to get that rate to the average. And now we need to deal with that gap in time. So we actually need to project what the value should be for the next mayor and councillor cohort. So because otherwise it's out of date, right? And that's where I think that the CPI calculation that was getting us toward the 45,000 for the counselors, and I think if I apply, I must have done the math wrong here. That's too much. Yes, I see there's an extra one. So that takes us to about 135 for the mayor. If you follow the thinking, right? So we're looking at this. I'm going to use language we use in my world. We're going to look at this as a wage structure. We're placing them on that wage structure. In the case of the counselors, they're there. In the case of the mayor, they're not. This wage structure, so we've got them aligned, but now the wage structure is out of date, and we're going to adjust the values of the wage structure, and then henceforth, whatever the administrative practice for the city to consider cost of living increases would then apply. So I think it's a two-step. So where we end up with that, if we're using, I used, I think, 4% just as a proxy for the CPI, that would take us to about 135 for the mayor and the 45-ish that we discussed for the councillors.
Okay. Thank you. I think Jordan had his hand up. Go ahead.
I have a question for maybe Derek or Indira, just so that we're looking at the same numbers, because I'm looking at a spreadsheet that Derek sent recently, and it lists the mayor's salary at 126, 129, and it lists the average at 124, 538. So the numbers I'm looking at for both the average and the median, the mayor's salary is currently above those. So that's I'm just sort of.
So I think in the spreadsheet that I'm looking at, the cell is T16 that has the average, and that's where the 129,905 that that would be the level that our mayor would need to be brought up to.
We're
Well, this is
use
if we're using it as a fraction
of budget.
of budget. Okay, okay, so, right, I see.
Oh, you were looking at the.
I was just
cost per
looking at the raw
resident.
numbers, the raw
At the-
averages.
The straight average.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm happy to use it. I'm, at the end of the day, I think we can, within some small range, I think we can justify pretty much anything, pick a metric, and you can sort of make it defensible. And I think that's important, but I also, you know, I think I've raised the concern before that if you tie it to how much you spend, then there's this sort of perception that, well, maybe you're encouraged to spend more because then your salary goes up, right? So I just, you know, so on the one average, the mayor is low, on the other average, the mayor is high. So I would kind of make the argument from a sort of political, you know, what I think the public would tolerate is probably the mayor and council are both, in my view, fairly well calibrated. There's an argument to be made that the wage structure for the mayor should go up a little bit. There's an adjustment. There's also an argument to be made that it doesn't need to be adjusted. So I'm happy either way. I think whatever we do, the increase should be modest, and it should just pretty much be COLA or CPI, whatever number we want to sort of pick, and you know, recognizing that they gave up a CPI increase last year. They're really due for a double in some sense, right? So again, I think that puts us in the $44,000-$45,000 range as the start number, and it doesn't have to be a round number, but I think if I was somebody considering running, it would be nicer if it was a round number rather than not, but it really makes no difference, a couple pennies here and there, right? You know, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think we need to argue too much about one way or the other. I think we just pick a metric and crunch the numbers and come back next time and say, yes, we think that's reasonable. You know, give Derek a chance to go away and tell us what the non-unionized folks are going to be getting at City Hall next year as an increase based on, you know, what the current CPI or whatever it is, that metric that they use, and we just apply that to the council and mayor's salary and see where that puts them, and that's probably going to be above the average for both of them in that case.
Okay, I think that's a good idea, Jordan. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with these numbers, 135 and 45. I'm good with that. How about you, Lindsay? Okay, Indira?
I'm fine. I you know, because I've got this math, certain nerd type of personality. So I would say the 45 and the 129 are apples and oranges, but I can live with that.
Okay, I like that you have the math thing. I'm relying on you. You're my math person here. Go ahead, Derek.
I would just like to make a quick comment in that, since we are doing a lot of these calculations based on back of the envelope, perhaps it would be best if I were to take some time the next day or two to double check the calculations and then share it with the committee, with the understanding this is sort of, we'll say, not a tentative agreement on the 45 and 135, but that we parking lot that for the time. I will calculate some of the numbers based on the discussions and see if that bears out, and then we can later confirm any actual numbers.
No, I agree. I agree completely with you. I think this is just where we're sort of looking to ballpark it, and then we're going to sort this all out. And I didn't ask John what he thought. I'm sorry, I was going to get to that too. But no, I think that, yeah, we're just sort of in our comfort zone, right? And then we'll figure out all the math that's involved. John?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. No, I agree with that in principle. And once we see the detailed numbers from Derek, then we have a concept to go with. I'd be to support that.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're on board with that. Jordan, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I mean, I'm fully on board with this approach. I think it's pretty much a in a lot of ways, it's a do nothing approach. Like there's going to be an increase, but it's pretty much going to be whatever they would have gotten anyhow if there was just another term of council, and we set that, rounded off and set it as the base. So I think that's probably going to be quite defensible and something that the public can get behind and accept as fair. So.
Okay. Any other comments or concerns, questions? Derek?
If I may, I think the conversation has wrapped up regarding the agenda items and seeing the time. I just quickly wanted to bring up with the committee members present, if it's okay with you, Laura, just in terms of scheduling, initially our work plan had our meeting in 2 weeks on the 9th as our final meeting, which I don't think we are at that point. We still have to do some calculations. So maybe what I would suggest is, rather than deciding here, but I'd get general agreement that there may be a necessity to have perhaps 2 final meetings, one more meeting with a draft report being presented, and then a follow-up meeting to finalize the report. So I may suggest that I'll reach out tomorrow about rescheduling meetings so that we can have 2 more meetings with the goal of having the final report completed by March the 15th, because working backwards, the goal is to get the final report to council on March 22nd, recognizing that the call for nominations for the 2022 election opens in early May. So that allows some time for information to be shared publicly with potential candidates on the remuneration rate. So I'll reach out to everybody tomorrow. I don't think there's any value in us trying to schedule things in the heat of the moment now. So hopefully everybody is okay with that plan, and you'll see some correspondence from me tomorrow on that.
That sounds good to me. And maybe it doesn't have to be as long either. Maybe we can just make them quick just to get through a few details and that we're all in agreement on various things. Sounds good to me.
And I'll put out there again, not anybody has to reach it, confirm at this meeting, but if there's somebody willing to lead on drafting the final report, I will be able to provide you with notes and background. So I'll just leave it at that. And if somebody wants to reach out to me directly via email to volunteer for that spot, that would be fantastic.
Could I nominate someone who I think would be brilliant? Yes, yes, you, Lindsay. You would be really, you'd be awesome, and I'd be willing to help you if you'd like to do.
No, and I think, and I was gonna actually put that out to Derek that I would, I mean, this is what I do, but you know, there is terminology that's so beyond, and Indira, like, I mean, a whole section.
I'd be happy to do provide an editorial before it comes to the full committee. Yeah. So
yeah, or basic, you know, you throw the information out there, and I can. No, I have absolutely no problem. I actually quite excited about this, but needing help and recognizing that I don't want to do this all by myself. So any help, but I can certainly start the process anyway.
And I'd be more than willing to offer any help you would need as well. But I think you're a great writer, and I think that would, and you've worked with a lot of this already, and that would be awesome. Be great. Okay. So,
thank you, Lindsay. I'll reach out to you tomorrow about this.
Okay, so should we just, so the date of the next meeting is February 9th, and motion to adjourn? We'll just close it all up really quickly.
Laura, quickly, I believe Jordan had something he wanted to bring up quickly under other business. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. I just thought we were running out of time. Okay, go ahead, Jordan. Sorry.
No, thanks. Sorry to keep us going here. I just, I'm not sure if it was a formal communication that we want to have it recorded as or not, but I think Derek has an announcement about one of the committee members.
Jordan has asked me to relay that one of the committee members, Jessica Seaton, has had to resign her position on the committee due to some changes in her personal circumstances. She unfortunately had been able to attend, I believe, one of the early meetings, and that was it. So I wanted to share that with the committee.
Thanks.
And with that, I think we can move to adjourn, Laura.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Okay, so I need a motion to adjourn. Okay, Jordan and John, and vote, I guess. We vote? I can't remember. Okay. Sorry. Thank you, everyone. And that was a really good meeting, and you guys are great committee. All right.
Thanks,
Have a great night.
everybody.
See you later, everyone. Bye-bye.